Preacher Bob and Gail McKinney, Wanda McClellan, Jamie Burleson, Iris Burleson, Gusty Gross, Barbara McLeod, Nita Wiseman, Joe Biddix, Russell Saxon, Vanessa Saxon, Betty McBee, Leah Whitson, and I think we can take her off because she got to come home. Danette Webster, Norris McKinney, Susan Phillips, and Jamie Burleson. He's on here twice. Yeah. And we need to add Hannah Blanton and Nick Grindstaff. Is there any other requests you'd like to make us aware of, or any praise reports?
I'll give a praise report on my mom and daddy. Both of them are doing much better. Mom's finally got over that infection or whatever it was that got in her feet so bad. She's actually up and moving around good. So.
Praise the Lord.
Mark McLeod got a good report from his stuff he had done, but Annette got a bad report yesterday, so let's put Annette McLeod Mark's life on there.
Laura Jane Bird, they flew her to Asheville today, and she fell.
Is that the one at the produce stand?
Yeah, she fell at the produce stand.
Brian was very concerned about whoever that was.
Didn't know she had a stroke or what. I still don't know if they determined that or not, but they think she's cracked a vertebra.
He said she took a hard hit.
Okay. Anything else? If nothing else, I'm going to ask Danny Woody if he would lead us in prayer.
Dear Lord, our Heavenly Father, we just humble bow and thank you and praise you for this beautiful day that you've let us be a part of, letting us gather back into your house tonight. We lift up this prayer list to you that you just touch and bless each one. You know their exact needs, and I just pray that your will would be accomplished in each situation. We lift up our church family that you just bless us and help us to be a bright spot in this community. Help us to be the witnesses that you would have us to be. Lord, I pray for the services tonight. You be at the preacher Marcus and the speaker that comes, that you just bless each one of them. Give them clarity of speech and thought to be able to say what you've had them to say. Pray for the service this Sunday, Lord, that you just bless in a mighty way. That this place would just be full. And that people would get some help and souls would be saved. Thank you, Lord, for answered prayers and those that you're going to answer. We ask it all in Jesus' precious name.
If you would, take your hymnal and turn to number 81. 81, let's all stand.
joy to have each of you here this evening. It is somewhat of a special evening, and I'm going to be very brief in what I say because we have some special guests here this evening to talk to us about foster parenting. And as you can see, our projector is not back yet. We had a video that we were going to show to go with the program. When we get our projector back, I will show it to you on a Wednesday night, but it just kind of gives an overview from a child's perspective of what if they are being placed in foster care, some of the things they feel and go through with, and sometimes being separated from a sibling and other things like that. I remember many years ago when Tris and I took our MAP training, as they call it, on one night they asked us all to bring a trash bag. And they said not to bring a large one, just a regular trash bag. And they had us to give them to them. And then they took them into another room and brought them back. And they had items in them that just wadded up, shoved in. Sometimes there was some folks had a dirty baby doll. Some bags had a broken car or truck, and a few clothing items. And then there were pieces of paper with words written on them. And that was more moving for me than the understanding that they may have one special toy, maybe a change of clothes. But the things that they didn't tell you was what they wrote on the slips of paper, the anxiety, the fear, the feeling of not being wanted, the uncertainty, not knowing what to expect, being afraid, and all these other things. And so I don't know how much time Tammy will spend tonight, but she's going to give us a short talk about it and answer some questions. But and there's some folks here with her, and she may recognize them. But I just wanted to read a few verses of Scripture from Psalm 127. The psalmist said, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of the mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." Now, I hope we understand that all children are part of the heritage of the Lord. And every child, whether it feels so or not, is wanted by God. And oftentimes they do, in these situations, feel unwanted or neglected. And so that's where people that have an opportunity to be a blessing and be a help. Most of you know, Tris and I fostered for 6 years in Alexander County. We had 17 children through our home in that 6 years. At one time, we had 5 car seats. There's not a minivan large enough to accommodate 5 car seats and 2 more children. It just don't happen. And so we drove around in what most people thought was the church van, but it belonged to us. It was an E350 Ford. And then after John, Rick, and Monica came to stay with us permanently, I learned this little tidbit talking about children. It says, "Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them," and just useless information, but it might intrigue you. When you study these old passages, in the days of the psalmist, a full quiver was 5 arrows. And so the Lord let us have 5 children. And I said, "Mama, our quiver is full." And, there were times that we felt like we failed to give these children what they needed. I won't call names or put anybody on the spot, but we had 2 brothers on one occasion. And they'd been in a very horrific situation and acted out in a lot of ways. And the oldest one, Jennifer, had a rabbit, and he killed it and left it for her to find right under the pen. The younger brother was trying to fit in with his classmates, and he took powdered sugar in a Ziploc bag to school and tried to pass it off as cocaine. So we had a real challenge with these two. And they stayed with us about 9 months, and it came time that as things went through the court that they went back with some family. And I told Tracy, I said, we failed these boys. We never reached them. But little did we know we had done more than we thought we had. That's the same boys that I've used the story before, and again, I don't use their names. But after we left the church in Taylorsville, went to Bethlehem, where the one brother walked 9 miles in 17-degree weather to the church to find us, because his younger brother was driving a car where a boy went to buy some dope, and his brother got shot sitting in the car. And he walked 9 miles and sat down on the porch, and when the pastor then came, he didn't know I weren't there, and it upset him. Where's Preacher Marcus? I've got to talk to him. And he said, well, I know where he is. I can get him on the phone, come inside out of the cold. And several years later, we realized that though we thought we'd failed, we'd made a difference, because when he got in a crisis, what he said on the phone, he said, you and Miss Teresa were the only 2 people that we ever really thought loved us. And he said, my brother might die, and I want somebody to pray for him. So you never know the difference you might make in a child's life for a short while or a long while. It's a wonderful thing. I'm biased to it. You all know that. But you have to make your own choice. It's not for everybody. But if the Lord would put it on your heart to open your home to a child in need, and I know everybody says, well, the hard part's letting them go. Believe me, it is. But for a while, you can sow some seed and show some love and make a difference. To little tots, they don't remember much, but they need to be nurtured and loved. They learn the most in those critical developmental years. I remember one occasion we were called to come to social services at 2:30 in the morning. They handed us a little baby girl. Her sister was 4. And they handed us a Food Line bag that had a dirty, nasty bottle in it, one little outfit, and no diapers. Thank God for all-night Walmarts. Teresa turned and looked at me, and she said, I guess you know we're going to the store. I said, yes, ma'am. And, of course, that little girl, the little baby, probably will never remember who we were. But for 7 or 8 months, they were safe. Her older sister realized that she didn't have to do everything for the baby and could just be a little girl. And these are just experiences we've had. I want Miss Tammy to come. I'm trying to remember Tammy Burleson. Peters, is that right? I always forget your other name. I know you as Tammy Burleson, but she's worked with DSS a long time. Some of you may not know, she's Miss Chris Gardner's sister, and I want her to come around and speak to us, and you can introduce your other guest. I know Neil Crisp here. These other ladies I do not know, but it's a joy to have them and these children with us this evening. And so Miss Tammy's going to come talk to us, and just come on up and share what you've got and whatever program you have. There may be some questions at the end, but this is very informal. We just want to give you information. Certainly if you want to go further with it, I'm sure she'll be glad to help you. So you come right on.
Thank you all for having us this evening. I'm Tammy Burleson, and I'm the supervisor of foster care at Mitchell DSS. And these are some of my workers. This is Takesha Odom, and she does foster care work as well as licensing of foster parents. And Natalie Bowman, she is a foster worker as well as a foster parent and an adoptive parent as well. So we just wanted to talk just a few minutes to you guys and just let you know what we're here for. We just came to discuss that there's a real dire need for foster parents here in Mitchell County. Right now we have less than 10 foster homes in the county. At one time we used to have about 20, but a lot of those families ended up adopting children, as a lot of times happens, and so their homes are full. So right now that's why we're really trying to come look for some more homes. Right now we have 57 children in custody, and only 22 of those are actually placed in our county. So we have 35 children that are out of the county, mainly due to the lack of local homes. So we have to send them, sometimes they're 30 minutes an hour, they could be several hours away. So many of them are in sibling groups, and we really try and keep sibling groups together. However, if there's a large number of children, a lot of homes can only take one or two, and then you end up having to separate. So it's really difficult with the lack of the foster home. So you want to talk some to Natalie?
Excuse my lovely disruption over here. They are a joy, but they are a handful. So when children come into foster care, they're taken away from their families. And as a result, they typically experience trauma, if nothing more than for just being removed from their families. But most of the time, they've also experienced ongoing trauma in their home. When there are not enough foster homes in our community, they're taken away from their friends, their school, their teachers, any family, siblings, and that significantly adds to their trauma. We can greatly reduce the amount of trauma in their lives and have an opportunity to make a huge impact on these children if we can keep them in our community. The majority of the families that we deal with are part of a cycle of dysfunction that's brought them into custody. These parents often are not raised in healthy and well-functioning families themselves. So when they have children, they often don't have the skills or experience to provide proper care for their children, and they continue that cycle of neglect and abuse. We're hoping to find people who are interested in a type of ministry to the entire family, not just to the children. We hope to find individuals who may not just be interested in adopting children or being a forever family to them, but also those who want a chance to provide advice and mentoring to help make a real change in the way these families function and to these families' futures in general.
And something else that we really, really need is like for people who don't feel like long-term fostering is their thing, we need respite homes, and that's for like a crisis or an emergency where a kid unexpectedly comes into custody and we can't find placement for them, and we need somewhere for them to go right then, maybe for the weekend or a week until we find them a permanent or more long-term placement. So if that's something you would be interested in, we really need those homes, because like at this time we really don't have those at all. Our classes start on May 7th, and they will be twice a week for 5 weeks from 5:30 to 8:30 usually, most likely, and that'll be on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you guys do want to sign up, I have some applications here that you can get, or either you can just call me. We've left some brochures and my contact information's on there, and you can call me at the office and I'll give you the information that you want to sign up.
So if you have any questions for us or anything, we'll be happy to answer any questions. If you want to talk to us later, you can give us a call. We've got some brochures to give out if anybody would like some of those. But really, that was a major part of our presentation there. So thank you for letting us come out.
Thank you, ladies. And I didn't think to mention, but when she did, the respite care is a big need as well. There were twice in the 6 years that Tris and I were fostering. They used it to help us when we had deaths in our family and had to travel. We were fortunate in Alexander County that they had several couples that were just that, respite couples. And I remember one time we took John, Ricky, and Monica, and it was kind of funny. John was the type, and I guess he still is, if the sun was awake, he was awake. He was up. And Ricky and Monica were small, and we were teaching them to pray at night, and Ricky didn't yet speak that well. And it came time for bed, and he was trying to tell this man that he wanted to pray, but he thought he was saying he wanted to play. And he kept telling him, no, you can't play, you got to go to bed. And Ricky said, no, not play, play. And he said, finally, after about 10 minutes, I figured out what he wanted. But that was a blessing to us when we'd had an emergency ourselves. We contacted our caseworker, social worker, and she made the arrangements. The folks were very accommodating. I think we used them, that same family both times. But another thing that you have an opportunity to do is to expose children to the love of Christ. They may not get that either. A lot of times when they're in homes that are not, and I don't mean to be critical, but they're not functional. They are dysfunctional. They weren't reared that way. Some of these children never get to go to Sunday school. And, you know, it's kind of like when we have Bible school. If you get a child and they've been exposed to it and you bring them, you know, they're probably not going to do like the kids that come every week. But that's okay because they're children. But we've seen it in our VBS. It makes a difference if it's just a few days because they get excited. And, you know, if you would consider praying about this, you know, I'm going to be the first to tell you, you're going to get your heart broke. But it's a good thing because in the end, you know that you've done what God asked of you and you've made a difference for a little while. And I know a lot of times people say, well, you know, I'm alone. I'm a single person. I don't think that really matters anymore. They've got single foster parents that, you know, of course they're not going to ask you to take 5 kids, but you could take 1 or 2. And, you know, I know sometimes when people work, it's difficult. But especially for folks that are kind of in early retirement or have one spouse that's at home, it might be an opportunity for you. It's certainly a worthwhile endeavor, and we'll never lose anything by investing in children. Did anybody have a question or anything you wanted to know more about? Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they do come to the classes and after they're through they decide, you know, based on what I've seen, this is not for me, they're not obligated, correct?
Absolutely. There's no commitment. You can just come and check it out. If it's for you, fine. If it's not, then that's fine. Maybe you might get some information that you can pass on to somebody else who might be interested.
Are you still licensed for 2 years at a time? That's what it was when we did it. Is it 2 years at a time? And, you know, and then again, you know, you can say no. But every 2 years you have the option to say, I'm going to renew, or, you know, I just can't go on. And that was the big reason that Teresa and I stopped. We'd adopted the children. Ricky and Monica were very small. And Teresa just said, you know, as much as you're gone, it's not fair to them. I can't give them the attention they need. It wasn't that we had a really horrible experience or something like that. We realized that it was an opportunity to minister. And again, it's not for everybody. But it might be something you'd want to pray about or think about and just consider it. If you have further questions, like I said, they're going to leave information. If you want to talk sometime about experiences, trust me, I'll be glad to talk to you. Every scenario is different, but you can get through it. And, you know, like I said, even the 2 boys that we really thought, you know, we didn't help them at all. In the end, we found out that it had made a difference. And you've met some of our foster acquaintances. Some of you will remember Haley. She'll still tell you today, I'm the only dad she ever had. It was kind of funny. When I drove the middle school bus at West, of course, she didn't think she was there. And I showed up the first day to drive the bus, and she comes running out the door. I'm a brand new male bus driver. And this young 7th grade girl comes running up, throws her arms and legs around me, and kisses me on the cheek. And the vice principal, who is my boss, I've never yet driven, is seeing this. And I told her, I said, Haley, honey, you can't do that here. He don't know who you are. She says, I'll fix that. She turned around and said, that's my dad. And he knows that I'm a pastor in Bethlehem, and he's met my family. He's like, okay, this is weird. And so I told him, I said, well, in essence, yes, I guess I am. I said, Haley lived with us for almost a year when she was 9. And I said, I guess in her mind, and he said, oh, I see. But she did, you know, accommodate, didn't do that there anymore. But you remember when she got married, she came up, her husband was a sailor, and I did their wedding ceremony. Every Father's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, we get a call or a card. I know when I did their ceremony, her mother was here, and she told her husband, she said, now you have to listen to him, not only is he the minister, but he's the only dad she's ever had. And, you know, things like that you don't think about, but it means a lot. Because that's not a have to. They're, you know, that doesn't, it's not because, well, they're my child and it's expected. No, it's just someone you were able to make a difference in their life and they remember. And that in itself is a blessing when you can be a help to people and to young people and to children. And you might be surprised how your family will react and receive. It always worked out in the 6 years that we did it. We always had kids at the holidays. It just seemed like that happened. And we took them to my mother's. We took them to Teresa's parents, and they celebrated with us. I remember when Haley was with us, Pastor Eddie and Miss Diane had invited us to come, and she came that week. And I called Pastor Eddie and I said, we've got an extra. And he acted like he had known her his whole life. And Haley had never had a steak and baked potato. They grilled steaks, and my pastor cut her steak for her, showed her how to fix potatoes. She still talks about that today. So you'd be surprised at how some folks you're acquainted with might receive. Now some won't. Some people have silly notions, and that's just what it is. And you know, the other thing you have to understand is these are children. They didn't ask for what happened. They didn't make the situation. And they just need somebody to care about them. And I guess maybe I'm a little bit of a salesman, but as I said, you know where our heart is and why we did it. And I can't twist your arm, and I wouldn't dare do it. Because you have to be settled in your heart that it's God's will for your life. Because if you're not, you won't make it. Because there's a lot that goes with it. And I do want you to get to see the video, and I'm sorry we can't, but it's a good video. When I watched it, it reminded me of several things that Teresa and I faced and dealt with, and understanding from an experienced perspective makes it make a little more sense. But I think the most precious part is when the foster mother at the end, and I don't want to be a spoiler, but she figures out what's really eating that little girl. And she thinks, well, here I go again. She's broken her doll. She's grabbing her things and throwing them in a bag because she thinks, I'm leaving again. I'm going to have to go someplace else. And instead, her little brother shows up. And that was a lot of what, and sometimes it can't be helped, like Tammy said, when they're large families. Sometimes it's not feasible. And that's difficult. Because through all they've been through, sometimes the only mainstay they had was each other. And that's a fact. That was the issue that Teresa and I faced with John, Ricky, and Monica, and you all know the story. When the time came that they were coming up for adoption, do you want any of them? Not unless you'll let me have all of them. Social worker said, you mean you want them all? It's the only way I'm going to do it. You're going to take all of them. I said, lady, if you've got a hearing problem, it's all or none. And they were elated because they said, this never happens. We can place one easy. Two's usually iffy. Three's unheard of. But from my background, I understood that. That's all they'd ever had was each other. And we didn't want to take that away from them. Sometimes that don't get to be. But you may be the person that can keep a brother and a sister, or a pair of sisters or a pair of brothers together for a while. So I want to close this with prayer. And if you want to speak to them one-on-one for a moment, I'm sure they will. They're going to leave information here. And the classes, you said, start May the what? May the 7th, okay. And are they going to be at DSS over in Bakersville? Okay. And so give it some thought. And again, if you have questions or need more information, talk to me, talk to Ms. Teresa. We'll get you connected to them. And just give it a matter of prayer. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this evening and for these folks that came tonight to give us an opportunity to understand the need. And Lord, help us to remember when Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of heaven. Lord, may we remember that we have an opportunity to be a witness and a blessing and a help to children. And God, some of them desperately need just somebody to love them, to care for them, to teach them to tie their shoes, to read them a Bible story or a nursery rhyme, tuck them in at night. Some of them, Lord, have parents that maybe they're where they are by their own doing, but some are there simply because they're a product of their upbringing. And they need somebody to come alongside them and help them to become the parents that they deep down want to be. And so, God, help us to search our hearts. and see opportunities all around us. And if it be your will and in your plan that we would be a part of this, then you make it clear to us. And allow us, Lord, to be able to do what you'd have us do to get glory to yourself. For Jesus' sake we pray. Amen. Let me say this before we dismiss. The young lady talked about modeling parenting. On 2 occasions, Teresa and I had children, and we actually did that. Part of the case, if you will, we met them at Matheson Park on given days, usually a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. If it was warm weather, for a couple, 3 hours. Sometimes we did a picnic. And we just kind of modeled in front of these younger moms and dads. Sometimes they were together, sometimes they weren't. Healthy parenting. And, you know, most of the time, if you're out that long, child will get upset and have a tantrum, and you deal with it, and they observe. And a lot of times, most of you know Miss Teresa, she can talk to anybody, but those young mothers would develop a rapport with her, and she could talk with them, and they would ask questions. And so sometimes it was a good thing. You know, people all have this idea that if a child's in foster care, that their parents must be trash. Well, that's not always true. And we need to remember this. Even if they are on the wrong side of the law, even if they've been removed because of abuse or drug addiction or alcohol abuse or whatever, there, except for the grace of God, go you and I. And so, you know, they're people too. And you can build a rapport with them and be able to minister in a lot of ways. Like I said, I'm not trying to oversell it, but do think about it, pray about it, and see what God would have you to do. Some people think, well, it'll tie me down. No, you can apply for permissions. We took kids to Florida. You just ask in advance, and they do paperwork. I guess they still do. They did back then. And you can take them with you on your trip. I mean, you don't have to say, well, if I do that, I can't go. I mean, you can take them right with you and do all kinds of things. Thank you for coming. Let's give them a hand for coming. And these lovely children, what a joy to have them here. I mean that sincerely. We took Haley, little Haley, to church the first time. She was 4. I don't know if she had never worn a dress or what, but I was giving the Bible study on Wednesday night. She got loose from my wife. She was about halfway back, standing in a pew, and she was waving her dress tail. Of course, you know, that kind of, so what did we do? We just, Teresa went and got her and sat her down, and it was okay. But that was an experience. But they have to learn. All right, let's stand. We'll have a word of prayer, and if you have questions, thank you for coming tonight, and we'll be dismissed. You can come up and get information. You can come to the front and speak to them, whatever you'd like to do. Pastor Tony, would you pray for us, please, sir?
Lord, we thank you for those that have come, Lord, that work with children, placing children in homes, Lord, and there's a great need, Lord, for more parents to step up. We just pray, Lord, that you meet those needs. Guide these folks as they try to do their best to take care of these children, Lord, and guide those that you have coming to us, Lord. We just pray, Lord, that the children will be taken care of and that you'd be honored, glorified, and praised.